The main line of High Republic novels continues with Cavan Scott's The Rising Storm. Now, to my knowledge, this is a direct sequel to Charles Soule's The Light of the Jedi, unlike the other stories in the High Republic multimedia project that are currently existing right now. Now, if you haven't seen my review of The Light of the Jedi and you haven't read it yourself, I highly recommend going back and checking it out first, because a lot of what I said about The Light of the Jedi, I surprisingly echo a lot here. From every experience I've had with the High Republic, whether it's the comics or the novels, one thing is certain to me, and that is the era has promise. The stories, the characters, the villains, the overarching narrative, they all have a promise, and the High Republic itself as an era has an opportunity to stand out and set itself apart from every other era in Star Wars. And The Rising Storm by Cavan Scott, it's a good entry that has some serious problems that I'm beginning to notice across these novels that I think really needs to be stamped out eventually, or I think it's just going to suffocate the stories. Now, in case you don't know what's going on in the High Republic, I'll give you a brief overview. In the first novel, The Light of the Jedi, a major disaster occurred on a planet which the Jedi had to intervene in, and they fixed, and they became lauded by the galaxy. The Chancellor of the High Republic is leading what's called the Golden Age by creating these great works that represent the power and unity of the Republic. However, there is a group of marauders, pirates called the Nihil, which are causing some problems, and there's also this growing threat from a plant-based carnivorous species called the Drengir, which is spreading across the galaxy. Now, The Rising Storm ignores the Drengir completely. This is all about the Nihil and the Republic that are clashing, and how the Republic are trying to represent themselves as this unified power across the galaxy. The story of The Rising Storm centers around an event on the planet Valo, where the Republic are showcasing to the galaxy all of their technological innovations, all of their treaties and alliances. It's basically this gigantic fair showcasing the Republic. Obviously, as you can guess from the first 2 pages, the Nihil then attack this fair, and the real meat of this story is kind of how all of the different protagonists, and this is where the problem is, are dealing with this attack. Much like The Light of the Jedi before, The Rising Storm doesn't have a protagonist. This book is very much a mishmash of perspectives between all of the main characters, and this is kind of a problem to me, because you're not with any characters long enough to really care about them in any kind of particular way. Yes, you can enjoy them, yes, you can find them interesting, there are some that are more boring than others, but you don't particularly fall in love with them simply because you just aren't with them enough. And yes, while it is awesome to be able to see this catastrophic event happen through the lens of so many different characters, all experiencing it differently, without any real protagonist to focus the story, you ironically feel kind of more just like a spectator watching it through the news than through the eyes of someone you're supposed to fall in love with. Not to mention that there are so many characters in this book that it's like having constant whiplash between all of these different viewpoints, and in the end you start forgetting about them. When you're reading this book, every chapter just flings you into a different perspective with so many characters appearing that you really don't remember their names. There's been so many times in this book where I have read a character's name and I've gone, hang on, who is this? Am I supposed to know them apart from like the main 5 protagonists, let's call them? And the book just shoves, and I really mean shoves, name after name after name after name down your throat. And it's just so hard to keep up with everybody that's being thrown at you. And this is even more frustrating when they're all part of different subplots within the book. For example, you'll be with the villains at one point, and instead of being with Marchion Ro, who is supposed to be the main villain, you're with Pan-Eta and Lorna D, and then whoever's below Lorna D and Pan-Eta. And it's just so much going on that it's just too much. And as I mentioned before, this really suffocates the main narrative. It's really hard to feel connected to these characters when the book doesn't want to stay with them. But I'm not saying that these characters are bad by any means. For example, the character of Elzar Mann, who is one of the few protagonists of the book, he's an extremely interesting Jedi. He kind of reminds me of Qui-Gon a little bit. He goes against the Council, he does what he thinks is right, but at the same time you can see that it has an effect on him because he's always cautious that maybe he'll fall to the dark side. And honestly, every time there was an Elzar Mann chapter in the book, my interest went up significantly because all of them were really well written. But then the book will just slow itself down, and not in a good way, by throwing you into the perspective of one of the two sub-villains that are just not interesting, and then it will be in the perspective of the Chancellor's son. It's just too whiplashy, and there's not enough focus on the characters that need it. Now, as for the writing in general, it is good. Sometimes the dialogue can be a little stale, but the descriptive nature of everything going on during the battle that's consuming an entire city is extremely precise, and it really does spark the imagination. The overarching story, though, is really where the problem lies. Now, as for the writing in general, it is very good. Sometimes the dialogue can be a little stale, but that's really my only criticism. The way Cavan Scott describes things, especially when they're going on during the main battle, it's all really precise and vivid, and it really does spark the imagination. However, the overarching story is where the problem is for me. Light of the Jedi set up this really interesting narrative of Marchion Ro having connections to the Santeca family and having this really unique technology that nobody really knew about. It had Elza Mann having these terrifying visions of destruction. It had Loden Greatstorm being captured by Marchion Ro. But all of these narrative threads that were set up in the original book kind of just got lost in the chaos that was the overarching battle of the story. Marchion Ro, who is supposedly the main villain, really has nothing to do in this entire story. His entire plotline felt kind of pointless, and when it comes to the ending, I was feeling extremely dissatisfied with how it concluded, and that is in no thanks to the rushed nature of the conclusion. It felt like 300 pages of this 450-page book were all about the Niles' attack on the Republic of Valo, and the descriptive nature of this attack and everybody's different perspectives during it. And then in the last 100 pages, they then try and cram in the overarching narrative where some of the characters find one of the main characters who is imprisoned from the last book in the main villain's flagship, and then they're supposed to be looking for the technology that allows them to skip through light speed, kind of, but then they stop caring about that, and I don't know, the ending felt really rushed to me. But as I mentioned, there is a lot of potential with the High Republic. While I still feel that the Nihil, in general, are pretty underwhelming as villains, the plotline that was established in the first book that isn't really touched upon in this one is still interesting. I mean, I want to see what happens with it, but I definitely want to see them cut down on this overusage of character perspectives and really focus on one of these characters, one or two of these characters in the next novels that are going to stay with and choose as their protags, because at the moment these books feel convoluted at times and they just feel overpacked with way too much information and way too many characters that you just don't feel invested in, and because of that you don't feel invested in the story. The Rising Storm isn't an incredible book, but it's not a bad book. To me, it's just kind of in the middle. The lack of a protagonist, the lack of a real overarching narrative, the lack of continuation, it kind of makes it feel like an odd one out. Aside from one or two characters, it doesn't really take the plot anywhere of the overall High Republic narrative. But it's still entertaining simply off the basis that the whole major battle is extremely descriptive, it's extremely vivid and fun to read, but there are a lot of faults that I think definitely should be criticised. However, there is one thing that I am finding extremely frustrating to constantly read all over the internet, and that is that the High Republic is like the Old Republic, or a rip-off of it. Listen, as somebody who's been with the Old Republic since he was a kid, to somebody who has based his channel around the entire era of the Old Republic, and I spend every day in the Old Republic universe researching and writing about it to make content, listen, the High Republic couldn't be any more different to it. I think the High Republic has definitely found its own little place within the Star Wars medium, but it needs to focus. It needs to figure out who is going to represent the High Republic, because, I mean, the poster girl of the High Republic, Avar Kriss, isn't even in this book. She's just mentioned in passing, there's just a lack of focus for the High Republic, and it needs to step up. It needs to put its foot on the gas a little bit, because after a good start with The Light of the Jedi, I feel that The Rising Storm has just taken a step back, just a little bit, but the potential is still there. I'd love to know in the comments below what you think of the High Republic. Have you read The Light of the Jedi? Are you interested in The Rising Storm? Have you read any of the other comics or the junior novels? What are you thinking of the era in general? And if you haven't experienced any of these stories yet, what's stopping you? Is there something particular that's not quite grabbing your interest? Please feel free to let me know. I'd love to read all of your opinions. I just want to give a big thanks to Del Rey for sending me out a copy of this book early so I could get into it as soon as possible. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell if you want to see more Star Wars and Knights of the Old Republic content from me. Also, don't forget to come and follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and join the Discord server because I would love to have you there. All links are in the description below. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.